Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their afternoons at the mall or talking about boys, Sarah was in her backyard practicing push-ups and running laps around the neighborhood. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had instilled in her a deep respect for military service and a belief that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. The decision to join the Marines came during her senior year of high school. Sarah was sitting in her guidance counselor's office looking at college brochures when a Marine recruiter walked in. Staff Sergeant Johnson was a tall, imposing figure in his dress blue uniform, and when he began talking about honor, courage, and commitment, Sarah felt something stir inside her chest. This wasn't just about serving her country. This was about proving to herself and everyone else that she belonged in a world that had traditionally been dominated by men. Her parents were initially skeptical. Her mother, Maria, worried about the physical demands and the potential dangers. Her father, Roberto, understood her calling, but knew the challenges she would face. "Mija," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, "the Marines will test everything you think you know about yourself. They'll break you down and build you back up. Are you ready for that?" Sarah looked at her father with determination in her eyes. "I've been ready my whole life, Papa." The recruitment process was rigorous. Sarah had to pass physical fitness tests, medical examinations, and extensive background checks. She spent months preparing, waking up before dawn to run, doing countless pull-ups and studying military history and protocols. Her dedication impressed Staff Sergeant Johnson, who had seen many young people come through his office with dreams of military service, only to falter when faced with the reality of what it entailed. Boot camp at Parris Island was everything Sarah had expected and more. The drill instructors were relentless, pushing the recruits to their physical and mental limits. Sarah excelled in many areas. Her marksmanship was exceptional, her leadership skills emerged naturally, and she maintained her composure under pressure. However, she also faced challenges that her male counterparts didn't experience. Some of the other female recruits struggled with the physical demands, and Sarah often found herself helping them during training exercises. She didn't mind. She believed in the Marine Corps principle that no one gets left behind. But she also noticed the way some of the male drill instructors looked at the female recruits, with a mixture of skepticism and resignation, as if they were already preparing for them to fail. Drill instructor Sergeant Williams was particularly tough on the female recruits. He seemed to take pleasure in pointing out their perceived weaknesses and comparing them unfavorably to the men. "Ladies," he would bark during morning PT, "I hope you realize that out there in the real world, the enemy isn't going to go easy on you because you're women. They're going to see you as weak links in the chain." Sarah refused to be intimidated. When Sergeant Williams made these comments, she would push herself even harder, doing extra reps when others stopped, volunteering for the most challenging assignments, and maintaining perfect military bearing even when exhausted. Her fellow female recruits began to look up to her, and even some of the male recruits started to respect her dedication and abilities. The defining moment of boot camp came during the Crucible, the 54-hour final test that every Marine recruit must pass. It involves sleep deprivation, limited food, and physically demanding challenges that test everything the recruits have learned. Sarah's squad was tasked with carrying a wounded Marine, represented by a heavy dummy, across difficult terrain while under simulated enemy fire. The male recruits naturally assumed they would handle the heavy lifting. But when one of them stumbled and fell, dropping his end of the stretcher, Sarah stepped in without hesitation. She grabbed the fallen recruit's position and, despite being significantly smaller than most of her male counterparts, helped carry the load for the remainder of the exercise. Her actions that day earned her the respect of her drill instructors and fellow recruits alike. Graduation day at Parris Island was one of the proudest moments of Sarah's life. As she stood at attention in her dress blue uniform, she could see her parents in the crowd, her father's chest puffed out with pride, and her mother wiping away tears. She had done it. She was officially a United States Marine. But boot camp was just the beginning. Sarah's military occupational specialty, MOS training, would determine her role in the Corps. She had scored exceptionally well on her aptitude tests and had her choice of several fields. While many expected her to choose a traditionally female-friendly role like administration or communications, Sarah surprised everyone by selecting military police. The military police training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri was intense and comprehensive. Sarah learned about law enforcement procedures, criminal investigation techniques, physical security protocols, and crowd control methods. She excelled in defensive tactics training, firearms instruction, and emergency response scenarios. Her instructors noted her natural leadership abilities and recommended her for advanced training. It was during this time that Sarah first encountered the kind of discrimination that would follow her throughout her career. During a joint training exercise with Army military police units, a senior Army sergeant openly questioned whether a little girl should be trusted with law enforcement duties. "This isn't a game," he told the training officer. "These MPs need to be able to handle real threats, not practice drills." Sarah's Marine instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Torres, immediately stepped in. "Sergeant, I suggest you watch Martinez in action before you make any judgments about her capabilities." The subsequent training exercise proved his point. Sarah successfully apprehended 2 suspects during a simulated riot control scenario, demonstrating tactical awareness and physical competence that impressed even her critics. After completing her MOS training, Sarah received orders to Camp Pendleton, California. She was assigned to the Provost Marshal's office, where she would be working as a military police officer, responsible for maintaining order and security on the base. The assignment came with both excitement and apprehension. Camp Pendleton was one of the largest Marine Corps installations in the world, with a complex hierarchy and established culture. Her first day at Camp Pendleton was a whirlwind of in-processing briefings and introductions. The Provost Marshal's office was a busy place, responsible for everything from traffic enforcement to criminal investigations. Sarah was assigned to a patrol unit under the supervision of Staff Sergeant Mike Reynolds, a career Marine with 15 years of experience. Staff Sergeant Reynolds was initially skeptical about having a female Marine in his unit, but he kept his opinions to himself and focused on ensuring Sarah received proper training. He was a fair supervisor who believed in judging Marines by their performance rather than their gender. But he also knew that Sarah would face challenges from others who might not share his perspective. The patrol unit consisted of 6 Marines, and Sarah was the only woman. Her patrol partners, Corporal James Mitchell and Lance Corporal Tony Garcia, were professional but cautious in their interactions with her. They had worked together for months and had developed an easy rapport that didn't immediately include the new female Marine. Sarah's first few weeks on patrol were relatively quiet. She handled routine duties like checking identification at gates, responding to minor incidents, and writing reports. She was competent and professional, but she sensed that her colleagues were still evaluating her, waiting to see how she would perform when faced with more serious situations. The test came sooner than expected. During a night patrol, Sarah and her partners received a call about a domestic disturbance in the base housing area. A military spouse had called to report that her husband, a Marine corporal who had been drinking, was becoming increasingly aggressive and threatening. When they arrived at the scene, they could hear shouting from inside the house. Staff Sergeant Reynolds made the tactical decisions while Sarah and the others took their positions. The situation was delicate. They were dealing with a fellow Marine who was obviously intoxicated and emotionally unstable, and they needed to de-escalate the situation without causing unnecessary harm. Sarah's training kicked in as they entered the house. The Marine corporal was standing in the living room, gesticulating wildly while his wife and 2 young children cowered in a corner. He turned toward the MPs when they entered, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Get out of my house," he shouted. "This is none of your business." Staff Sergeant Reynolds began speaking in calm, measured tones, trying to de-escalate the situation. But the corporal's attention was drawn to Sarah, and his demeanor shifted from general anger to specific hostility. "What's she doing here?" he sneered, pointing at Sarah. "Since when do they send little girls to do men's work?" Sarah maintained her professional composure, keeping her hand near her equipment, but not making any threatening moves. She had been trained for situations like this, where suspects might try to provoke her or challenge her authority based on her gender. The corporal took a step toward Sarah, his fists clenched. "I'm not taking orders from some female who probably can't even handle herself in a real fight." That was when Sarah's training and natural instincts combined in a display of professional competence that would be talked about in the Provost Marshal's office for months to come. When the corporal lunged toward her, clearly intending to test her physically, Sarah smoothly sidestepped, used his momentum against him, and had him on the ground in a controlled hold before he knew what had happened. The room fell silent, except for the sound of the corporal's labored breathing. Sarah had neutralized the threat without causing injury, demonstrating both her physical capabilities and her professional judgment. Staff Sergeant Reynolds and the other MPs quickly moved in to secure the scene, while Sarah maintained control of the suspect. As they processed the arrest and ensured the family's safety, Staff Sergeant Reynolds pulled Sarah aside. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he said quietly. "You handled that exactly right, professional, controlled, and effective." Word of the incident spread quickly through the military police unit. Sarah had proven herself under pressure, demonstrating that she could handle dangerous situations with the same competence as any male Marine. Her patrol partners began to treat her as a full member of the team rather than a potential liability. But Sarah's success also attracted attention from higher up the chain of command. The Provost Marshal, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, had been watching Sarah's progress with interest. As one of the few senior female officers on the base, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes understood the challenges that female Marines faced and was always looking for opportunities to mentor promising young women. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called Sarah into her office a few days after the domestic incident. The office was decorated with military awards, unit citations, and photographs from various deployments. Behind her desk hung a large American flag and the Marine Corps colors, reminders of the traditions and values that guided their service. "Corporal Martinez," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes began, "I've been reviewing your performance reports, and I'm impressed with what I see. Your instructors at Parris Island and Fort Leonard Wood gave you outstanding evaluations, and Staff Sergeant Reynolds tells me you handled yourself exceptionally well during the domestic incident." Sarah stood at attention, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm just trying to do my job to the best of my ability." Lieutenant Colonel Hayes smiled. "That's exactly the attitude I like to hear. I want you to know that I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion and specialized training. The Corps needs Marines like you, professional, competent, and dedicated to excellence regardless of the obstacles you might face." The conversation was encouraging, but Lieutenant Colonel Hayes also offered Sarah some advice that would prove prophetic. "You're going to face challenges in your career that your male counterparts won't experience," she said. "Some people will question your presence in the Corps, your capabilities, and your right to be here. The key is to never let those doubts affect your performance or your confidence. Always be prepared to prove yourself, because unfortunately, you'll probably have to do it more often than you should." Sarah left the meeting feeling motivated and determined. She understood that her career would likely involve constantly proving herself to skeptics and overcoming barriers that existed primarily because of her gender. But she was ready for the challenge. She hadn't joined the Marines for an easy path. She had joined to test herself against the highest standards and to serve her country with honor. The months that followed confirmed Lieutenant Colonel Hayes' predictions. Sarah continued to excel in her duties, earning praise from supervisors and respect from colleagues. She was promoted to corporal ahead of schedule and was selected for additional training in criminal investigations and counterintelligence. However, she also encountered resistance from some quarters. A few senior non-commissioned officers questioned whether female Marines belonged in law enforcement roles, arguing that they lacked the physical presence and intimidation factor necessary for effective policing. Some junior Marines tested her authority, seemingly more willing to challenge orders from a female corporal than from their male counterparts. Sarah handled each challenge with professional grace and unwavering competence. When a lance corporal questioned her authority during a routine inspection, she calmly but firmly established her position in the chain of command. When a civilian contractor made inappropriate comments about her appearance, she filed a formal complaint and ensured that proper action was taken. Her reputation grew throughout Camp Pendleton. She became known as a Marine who could handle any situation with professionalism and competence. Other female Marines began seeking her advice and mentorship, looking up to her as proof that women could succeed in traditionally male-dominated fields. The turning point in Sarah's early career came when she was selected for deployment to Afghanistan as part of a military police unit supporting combat operations. The deployment would test everything she had learned and would put her in situations where gender bias could have life-or-death consequences. As Sarah prepared for deployment, she reflected on her journey from a small-town Texas girl to a respected Marine corporal. She had proven herself repeatedly, overcome obstacles, and earned the respect of most of her colleagues. But she also knew that the biggest challenges of her career still lay ahead. The deployment to Afghanistan would test not only her professional skills, but also her ability to maintain her principles and composure in an environment where some people still questioned whether women belonged in combat zones. Little did she know that her most defining moment as a Marine was still to come, a moment that would require her to stand up not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever worn the uniform. The transport plane descended through the thin Afghan air as Sarah gazed out the small window at the barren landscape below. Camp Leatherneck stretched across the desert like a small city, its rows of temporary buildings and defensive positions a testament to the American military presence in Helmand Province. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she prepared for her first combat deployment. The military police unit she was joining had been in Afghanistan for 3 months already, establishing security protocols and supporting ongoing operations against Taliban forces. As the plane touched down on the dusty runway, Sarah grabbed her gear and prepared to step into a world unlike anything she had experienced during her stateside service. Staff Sergeant David Thompson met Sarah and the other new arrivals at the flight line. Thompson was a seasoned veteran with 2 previous deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. His weathered face and no-nonsense demeanor spoke of someone who had seen combat and understood the serious nature of their mission. "Welcome to paradise," Thompson said with dry humor as he led them toward a convoy of armored vehicles. "Hope you brought your sunscreen and your sense of humor because you're going to need both out here." The ride to their forward operating base, FOB, took them through a landscape that seemed both ancient and apocalyptic. Mud brick villages dotted the horizon, while armored vehicles and checkpoints reminded everyone that this was an active war zone. Sarah observed everything with keen interest, noting the security procedures and tactical considerations that would become part of her daily life. FOB Chapman was smaller than Camp Leatherneck, but bustling with activity. The base housed approximately 800 Marines and sailors from various units, all working together to maintain security and support combat operations in the surrounding area. The military police detachment was responsible for base security, prisoner handling, route clearance, and liaison with local Afghan forces. Sarah's new living quarters were Spartanly functional, a small room in a concrete block building that she shared with 3 other female Marines from different units. The accommodations were basic but adequate, with each Marine having a bunk, a small locker, and enough space for essential personal items. The shared shower and bathroom facilities were a significant adjustment from the privacy she had enjoyed stateside. Her first briefing was conducted by Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the officer in charge of the military police detachment. Captain Rodriguez was a graduate of the Naval Academy who had already completed 1 deployment to Iraq. She was known for her tactical acumen and her ability to maintain high standards while treating all Marines fairly regardless of gender. "Corporal Martinez," Captain Rodriguez began, "I've reviewed your personnel file, and I'm impressed with your performance at Camp Pendleton. However, I want to be clear about the challenges you'll face here. This deployment will test everything you've learned about being a Marine, and you'll be operating in an environment where some of our coalition partners and local forces may not be accustomed to working with female military personnel." The briefing covered the current security situation, rules of engagement, cultural sensitivities, and specific duties that Sarah would be expected to perform. The military police unit was involved in everything from manning entry control points to conducting joint patrols with Afghan National Army forces. Sarah would be working primarily with Staff Sergeant Thompson's team, which was responsible for convoy security and route clearance operations. Her first few weeks at FOB Chapman were a period of adjustment and learning. Sarah quickly adapted to the deployment routine: early morning briefings, equipment checks, patrol preparations, and the constant state of alertness required in a combat environment. She impressed her new colleagues with her attention to detail and her willingness to take on any assignment without complaint. The cultural challenges that Captain Rodriguez had mentioned became apparent immediately. During joint operations with Afghan forces, Sarah noticed the discomfort and confusion of some Afghan soldiers when they encountered American female Marines in combat roles. However, she also observed that professional competence transcended cultural barriers. When she demonstrated her skills and knowledge, most of the Afghan soldiers accepted her as a fellow warrior. Sarah's first real test came during a convoy security mission to deliver supplies to a remote outpost near the Pakistani border. The route was known to be dangerous, with frequent improvised explosive device (IEEA) attacks and potential for enemy contact. Staff Sergeant Thompson assigned Sarah to the lead vehicle as the gunner, a position that required constant vigilance and quick reaction times. As the convoy moved through a narrow valley, Sarah spotted something that didn't look right: freshly disturbed earth along the roadside that could indicate an IED placement. She immediately alerted the convoy commander, who ordered the vehicles to stop while explosive ordnance disposal (EOD) teams investigated. Sarah's sharp eyes had potentially saved lives. The EOD team discovered a large IED buried in the exact location she had identified. If the convoy had continued, the lead vehicle would likely have been destroyed, with casualties among the Marines inside. Staff Sergeant Thompson was effusive in his praise. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he said after the EOD team had cleared the device. "That's exactly the kind of situational awareness that keeps Marines alive out here." Word of Sarah's successful IED spot spread through the unit, earning her respect and credibility among Marines who might have initially been skeptical about a female Marine's combat capabilities. However, it also attracted attention from less supportive quarters. Colonel James Harrison was the commanding officer of the larger task force that included Sarah's military police unit. Harrison was an old-school Marine who had enlisted in the 1980s and worked his way up through the ranks. He was known for his tactical competence and his dedication to Marines under his command, but he also held traditional views about women's roles in the military. Harrison had been watching the integration of female Marines into combat roles with skepticism. While he followed orders and implemented policies regarding gender integration, he privately believed that women in combat units created unnecessary complications and potential vulnerabilities. Sarah's success in identifying the IED had reached his attention, but rather than viewing it as validation of female Marines' capabilities, he saw it as an isolated incident that didn't change his fundamental concerns. The clash between Sarah and Colonel Harrison came to a head during a routine inspection of the military police detachment. Harrison was conducting his monthly visit to evaluate the unit's readiness and effectiveness. He reviewed equipment, questioned Marines about their duties, and observed training exercises. During the inspection, Harrison noticed that Sarah had been assigned to a leadership position for an upcoming mission. She was designated as the team leader for a joint patrol with Afghan National Police Forces, responsible for coordinating security at a local market where intelligence suggested Taliban operatives were trying to intimidate vendors and extort money. Harrison pulled Captain Rodriguez aside after observing the mission briefing. "Captain, I have concerns about putting Corporal Martinez in charge of this patrol. This is a high-visibility mission with significant cultural sensitivities. Are you sure a female Marine is the right choice for team leader?" Captain Rodriguez was prepared for this conversation. She had anticipated that Sarah's rising profile and increasing responsibilities would eventually attract scrutiny from senior officers who questioned women's roles in combat positions. "Sir, Corporal Martinez has consistently demonstrated exceptional leadership abilities and tactical competence," Captain Rodriguez replied. "She has successfully completed all required training, and her performance on previous missions has been outstanding. I selected her for this position based on merit, not gender." Harrison remained unconvinced. "Captain, I understand your confidence in Corporal Martinez, but we need to consider the broader implications. How will the Afghan forces react to taking orders from a female Marine? What if the situation escalates and physical confrontation becomes necessary? We can't afford to compromise mission effectiveness for the sake of political correctness." The conversation was professional but tense. Captain Rodriguez found herself in the difficult position of defending her personnel decisions while respecting the chain of command. She believed strongly in Sarah's capabilities but also understood the political and practical considerations that Harrison was raising. "Sir, I respectfully disagree with your assessment," Captain Rodriguez said carefully. "Corporal Martinez has already worked successfully with Afghan forces on multiple occasions. Her professional competence has earned their respect, and her language skills and cultural awareness actually make her more effective than some of her male counterparts in these situations." Harrison was not easily swayed. His concerns were not necessarily about Sarah's individual capabilities, but about what he saw as a broader policy that was forcing the military to prioritize social engineering over mission effectiveness. However, he also recognized that directly overruling Captain Rodriguez's personnel decisions without clear justification could create its own problems. "Captain, I want you to closely monitor this mission," Harrison finally said. If there are any issues, and I mean any issues, I want a full report immediately. Captain Rodriguez briefed Sarah on her conversation with Colonel Harrison, though she didn't reveal the full extent of his skepticism. She wanted Sarah to be aware that her performance was being watched closely, but didn't want to undermine her confidence or create additional pressure. Corporal Martinez, Colonel Harrison will be paying particular attention to tomorrow's patrol, Captain Rodriguez explained. This is an opportunity to demonstrate the professional excellence that I know you're capable of. Just focus on the mission and execute your plan according to the briefing. Sarah understood the subtext of the conversation. She had encountered enough skepticism during her career to recognize when she was being tested not just as a Marine, but specifically as a female Marine. Rather than feeling discouraged, she felt motivated to prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to professional competence. The market patrol was scheduled for early morning, when vendors would be setting up their stalls and activity would be at its peak. Sarah's team consisted of 4 Marines and 6 Afghan National Police officers. Her mission was to establish a visible security presence, gather intelligence about Taliban activities, and build relationships with local merchants who might provide information about insurgent operations. Sarah spent the evening before the patrol reviewing intelligence reports, studying maps, and coordinating with the Afghan police commander, Captain Bashir Ahmadzai. Captain Ahmadzai was a professional police officer who had worked with American forces before, and he seemed genuinely impressed by Sarah's preparation and tactical knowledge. You know this area very well for someone who has only been here a few weeks, Captain Ahmadzai commented as they reviewed the patrol route. Your questions show good understanding of the security situation. Sarah had indeed studied the area extensively, memorizing street layouts, identifying potential threat locations, and learning about local customs and sensitivities. She understood that success in counterinsurgency operations required more than just military tactics. It demanded cultural awareness, communication skills, and the ability to build trust with local populations. The patrol began before dawn, with Sarah's team moving through the quiet streets toward the market area. She maintained constant communication with her Marines, monitored radio traffic from other units, and coordinated movements with the Afghan police. Her situational awareness and attention to detail impressed both her American colleagues and Afghan partners. As they established their presence in the market, Sarah demonstrated the interpersonal skills that made her particularly effective in this environment. She spoke basic Dari and Pashto, which she had learned during pre-deployment training, and she understood local customs well enough to interact respectfully with merchants and customers. The breakthrough came when an elderly vendor approached Captain Ahmadzai and began speaking in rapid Pashto. Sarah couldn't understand everything being said, but she could tell from body language and tone that the man was providing important information. Captain Ahmadzai translated that the vendor had observed suspicious individuals asking questions about patrol schedules and offering money to anyone who would provide information about American and Afghan force movements. Sarah immediately recognized the significance of this intelligence. She coordinated with Captain Ahmadzai to gather more detailed information while maintaining security protocols. Her professional handling of the situation impressed the Afghan police and provided valuable intelligence that would be used to plan future operations. The patrol was returning to base when they encountered their most serious challenge. A group of young Afghan men began shouting and throwing rocks at the patrol, apparently trying to provoke a confrontation. The situation was tense and potentially dangerous. Any overreaction could escalate into a serious incident with political ramifications. Sarah quickly assessed the situation and made tactical decisions that diffused the tension. She directed her Marines to maintain defensive positions while avoiding any actions that could be perceived as aggressive. She worked with Captain Ahmadzai to identify the ringleaders and gradually disperse the crowd without resorting to force. Her calm, professional response turned a potentially explosive situation into a demonstration of restraint and tactical judgment. The young men eventually dispersed, and the patrol returned to base without incident. However, the real test was still to come. Colonel Harrison was waiting for them when they returned to Fob Chapman. He had been monitoring radio traffic and was aware of both the intelligence-gathering success and the crowd confrontation incident. Sarah could tell from his expression that he was prepared to find fault with her performance. Corporal Martinez, I want a complete debrief of today's patrol, Harrison said curtly. I want to know about every decision you made, every interaction with Afghan forces, and your assessment of the overall mission effectiveness. Sarah provided a thorough, professional briefing that covered all aspects of the patrol. She explained her tactical decisions, described the intelligence they had gathered, and analyzed the crowd incident and how it had been resolved. Her presentation was clear, detailed, and demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of both military tactics and cultural dynamics. Throughout her briefing, Sarah noticed that Colonel Harrison was looking for weaknesses or mistakes that would validate his skepticism about female Marines in leadership positions. However, her performance had been exemplary, and even Harrison had to acknowledge that the mission had been successful by any objective measure. Captain Ahmadzai, who had been invited to participate in the debrief, provided unsolicited praise for Sarah's performance. Corporal Martinez demonstrated excellent leadership and cultural awareness, he told Colonel Harrison. My men were very impressed with her professionalism and tactical knowledge. We look forward to working with her again. Harrison found himself in the awkward position of having to acknowledge success when he had been expecting to identify problems. Sarah's performance had been objectively outstanding, and the praise from Afghan partners made it impossible to criticize her leadership or effectiveness. Corporal Martinez, you conducted a successful patrol, Harrison said grudgingly. However, I want you to understand that every mission carries risks, and leadership positions require constant vigilance and adaptability. Sarah maintained her professional composure throughout the conversation, but she could sense the underlying tension and skepticism. She had proven herself once again, but she also understood that some people would never be fully convinced that women belonged in combat leadership roles regardless of their performance. The successful market patrol established Sarah's reputation within the task force as a competent, reliable leader who could handle complex missions with multiple objectives. However, it also intensified the scrutiny she faced from senior officers who remained skeptical about gender integration in combat units. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not only Sarah's professional abilities, but also her courage in standing up for her principles and her right to serve as an equal member of the Marine Corps. The incident that would define her career was still to come, but the foundation had been laid through months of proving herself in increasingly challenging situations. The tension at FOB Chapman had been building for weeks. Sarah's continued success and growing reputation as a capable leader had created an undercurrent of resentment among some of the senior staff, who felt that the integration of women into combat roles was being pushed too aggressively. Colonel Harrison's skepticism had spread to some of his subordinates, creating an environment where Sarah's every action was scrutinized and questioned. The breaking point came during a multi-unit briefing for Operation Desert Storm, a large-scale mission aimed at disrupting Taliban supply lines in a particularly dangerous sector of Helmand Province. The operation would involve Marines, Army units, and Afghan National Army forces working together in a coordinated assault that could last several days. Sarah had been selected by Captain Rodriguez to serve as one of the liaison officers responsible for coordinating between American and Afghan forces during the operation. It was a significant responsibility that required tactical knowledge, language skills, and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. Her selection was based purely on merit. She had demonstrated all the necessary qualifications during her previous missions. The main briefing was held in the largest conference room on the base, with representatives from all participating units. Sarah took her place among the other liaison officers, most of whom were senior non-commissioned officers or junior officers. She was the only woman in the room except for Captain Rodriguez, who was presenting the military police component of the operation. Major General Robert Sullivan was visiting from Regional Command Southwest to oversee the planning for this significant operation. Sullivan was a highly decorated officer with multiple combat deployments who was known for his tactical brilliance and his demanding leadership style. However, he also came from the old guard of military leadership and had mixed feelings about some of the social changes happening within the armed forces. As the briefing progressed, each unit presented their role in the operation. When Captain Rodriguez introduced the liaison team, she mentioned Sarah by name and described her qualifications for the assignment. Sarah stood briefly to acknowledge the introduction, as was customary during formal military briefings. The room was filled with experienced combat veterans, and most acknowledged Sarah's introduction with professional courtesy. However, she could sense some skepticism from certain quarters. A few older sergeants exchanged glances, and she noticed Colonel Harrison's disapproving expression when her role was announced. After the formal briefing ended, the attendees broke into smaller groups to coordinate specific aspects of the operation. Sarah joined the liaison coordination meeting, where she would be working with Army and Afghan representatives to establish communication protocols and contingency plans. It was during this smaller meeting that the incident occurred which would become the defining moment of Sarah's career. Master Sergeant Kevin O'Brien, a senior Army non-commissioned officer with over 20 years of experience, had been assigned as the senior enlisted advisor for the liaison team. O'Brien was known for his competence and his straightforward, no-nonsense approach to military operations. However, O'Brien was also old school in his attitudes about women in combat. He had served during the era when female service members were excluded from direct combat roles, and he believed that recent policy changes were compromising military effectiveness for the sake of political correctness. As the liaison team began discussing communication procedures, O'Brien interrupted Sarah mid-sentence when she was explaining coordination protocols with Afghan forces. His tone was dismissive and condescending. "Hold on there, Corporal," O'Brien said, emphasizing her rank in a way that suggested it was insufficient for the discussion. "I think we need someone with more experience handling these kinds of operations. Why don't you take notes while the senior people talk through the real tactical decisions?" The room fell silent. Sarah felt her face flush, not with embarrassment but with controlled anger. O'Brien's comment was inappropriate on multiple levels. It questioned her qualifications based on assumptions about her gender rather than her demonstrated competence. And it violated basic military protocol by dismissing a properly assigned Marine in front of coalition partners. Sarah maintained her composure, but her voice carried unmistakable authority when she responded. "Master Sergeant O'Brien, I was assigned to this position by my chain of command based on my qualifications and previous performance. I'm prepared to discuss any tactical or operational concerns you might have about my recommendations." O'Brien was not accustomed to being challenged by junior Marines, especially female ones. His response revealed the depth of his skepticism about women in combat roles and his belief that Sarah's presence was the result of political pressure rather than genuine competence. "Look, Corporal, I'm sure you're very good at writing reports and handling administrative tasks, but this is serious business. We're talking about life and death decisions that require real combat experience and tactical judgment. Maybe you should call your superior and get someone qualified to handle this assignment." The insult was clear and unmistakable. O'Brien was suggesting that Sarah was inherently unqualified for her assigned role because of her gender, and he was demanding that she be replaced by someone he deemed more suitable. The Afghan and Army representatives in the room looked uncomfortable, unsure how to react to what was obviously a serious breach of military protocol. Sarah stood up slowly, her bearing radiating the quiet confidence that had characterized her entire military career. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried the unmistakable authority of a Marine who had proven herself repeatedly under the most demanding circumstances. "Call my superior?" Sarah said, her eyes locked on O'Brien's face. "You're looking at her." The room went completely silent. O'Brien's face registered shock, confusion, and then growing anger as he realized what Sarah had just implied. She wasn't claiming to be his superior in rank. She was asserting that she was his equal in competence, experience, and authority, and that his assumptions about her capabilities were based on prejudice rather than facts. Sarah continued, her voice steady and professional but leaving no doubt about her position. "Master Sergeant O'Brien, I was assigned to this liaison team because I have successfully completed 3 previous joint operations with Afghan forces. I speak both Dari and Pashto, and my tactical recommendations have been implemented by senior commanders based on their merit. If you have specific concerns about my qualifications or recommendations, I'm happy to address them professionally. If your objections are based on my gender rather than my performance, then I suggest you reconsider your position." The confrontation had escalated beyond a simple disagreement about assignments. Sarah had directly challenged O'Brien's authority to question her qualifications based on gender, and she had done it in front of representatives from multiple military units and coalition partners. The implications were significant for both of their careers. O'Brien was faced with a choice that would define his own professional standing. He could acknowledge that his objections were inappropriate and work with Sarah professionally, or he could double down on his position and create a formal confrontation that would require intervention from senior commanders. Unfortunately, O'Brien chose the latter course. His pride and his fundamental beliefs about women in combat made it impossible for him to back down gracefully. Corporal Martinez, I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. This isn't about political correctness or proving a point. This is about combat effectiveness and the safety of the Marines and soldiers who will be depending on these coordination efforts. Sarah realized that the confrontation had reached a point where professional intervention would be necessary. However, before she could respond, Major General Sullivan entered the room. He had been conducting his own coordination meetings and had come to check on the progress of the liaison planning. Sullivan immediately sensed the tension in the room. As an experienced commander, he could read body language and recognize when a situation had moved beyond normal professional disagreements. The uncomfortable silence and the hostile postures of O'Brien and Sarah made it clear that something significant had occurred. "What's the situation here?" Sullivan asked, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting straight answers to direct questions. O'Brien saw an opportunity to escalate the situation to a level where senior officers would make decisions that aligned with his views about women in combat. He believed that if he presented his concerns to a general officer, he would receive support for his position. "Sir, I have serious concerns about the qualifications and experience level of some of the personnel assigned to this critical liaison mission," O'Brien said, looking directly at Sarah. "I believe we need more experienced leadership to ensure mission success and personnel safety." Interesting, the case of the big gal was crowded in Britain. However, he was an experienced commander who understood the difference between legitimate professional concerns and personal prejudices disguised as tactical considerations. "Master Sergeant O'Brien, are you questioning the competence of a Marine who was properly assigned to this mission by her chain of command?" Sullivan asked, his tone carrying a warning that O'Brien failed to heed. O'Brien pressed forward with his complaint, apparently confident that a senior general would share his views about appropriate roles for female service members. "Sir, I just think we need to be realistic about the capabilities and limitations of all personnel involved in this operation. Some assignments require specific types of experience and physical capabilities." Sarah realized that this was her moment to stand up not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever served in uniform. She had spent her entire career proving her competence and earning respect through performance, but now she was facing a direct challenge that questioned her fundamental right to serve in her chosen role. "General Sullivan," Sarah said, stepping forward with the confidence that had been forged through years of proving herself in demanding situations. "Master Sergeant O'Brien has questioned my qualifications for this assignment based on his assumptions about my gender rather than my demonstrated performance. I request the opportunity to address his concerns and present my qualifications for your evaluation." Sullivan looked at both Marines carefully, understanding that this confrontation represented larger issues about military culture and the integration of women into combat roles. His decision would send a message not just to the individuals involved but to everyone present about the military's commitment to merit-based assignments. "Corporal Martinez," Sullivan said, "present your qualifications and experience relevant to this mission." Sarah provided a concise but comprehensive summary of her training, deployment experience, language skills, and previous mission successes. She described her work with Afghan forces, her tactical knowledge, and the specific contributions she had made to previous operations. Her presentation was factual, professional, and demonstrated a level of competence that was impossible to dismiss. When she finished, Sullivan turned to O'Brien. "Master Sergeant, do you have specific factual concerns about Corporal Martinez's qualifications as she has presented them, or are your objections based on other considerations?" O'Brien found himself trapped by his own prejudices. He could not identify specific factual deficiencies in Sarah's qualifications without revealing that his objections were based primarily on her gender. His silence spoke volumes about the nature of his concerns. Sullivan's response was swift and unambiguous. "Master Sergeant O'Brien, Corporal Martinez will continue in her assigned role as liaison officer. Her qualifications are appropriate for this mission, and her chain of command has confidence in her abilities. If you cannot work effectively with all assigned personnel regardless of gender, then perhaps you should reconsider your own assignment to this operation." The rebuke was clear and public. Sullivan had not only supported Sarah's assignment but had directly challenged O'Brien's fitness for his own role if he could not work professionally with female service members. The message was unmistakable. The military would not tolerate discrimination disguised as tactical concerns. O'Brien realized that his gamble had failed spectacularly. Instead of gaining support for his position, he had been publicly corrected by a general officer in front of multiple witnesses. His credibility and professional standing had been damaged by his inability to separate personal prejudices from professional requirements. "Yes, sir," O'Brien replied stiffly. "I understand your position." Sullivan was not finished. He used the incident as a teaching moment that would resonate throughout the units involved in the operation. "Ladies and gentlemen, let me be absolutely clear about something. This military judges Marines and soldiers by their performance, their competence, and their dedication to mission accomplishment. Any other considerations are inappropriate and will not be tolerated. We are all here to serve our country and support each other as professional warriors, regardless of gender, race, or any other characteristic that does not affect job performance." The room remained silent as Sullivan's words sank in. His statement was unambiguous support for merit-based assignments and a clear rejection of discrimination based on gender stereotypes. For Sarah, it was validation of everything she had worked for throughout her career. Sullivan then addressed Sarah directly. "Corporal Martinez, I expect you to execute your assigned duties with the same professionalism and competence that earned you this assignment. You have my full support and confidence." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "Thank you, sir." As the meeting resumed, the dynamic in the room had fundamentally changed. Sarah's position as liaison officer was no longer questioned, and O'Brien was forced to work with her professionally or face additional consequences. The other attendees had witnessed a clear demonstration that the military's commitment to gender integration was not merely policy, but was actively enforced by senior leadership. The operation itself was a significant success. Sarah's coordination with Afghan forces proved instrumental in achieving mission objectives, and her tactical recommendations contributed to the overall effectiveness of the multi-unit effort. Her performance during the operation validated Sullivan's support and demonstrated that merit-based assignments produced superior results. The incident became legendary within military circles, spreading far beyond FOB Chapman. The story of the female Marine who stood up to discrimination with the simple phrase, "You're looking at her," became an inspiration to women throughout the armed forces and a cautionary tale for those who would let prejudice cloud their professional judgment. For Sarah, the confrontation was both a personal triumph and a sobering reminder of the challenges that still existed for women in the military. She had won this particular battle, but she understood that the broader struggle for true equality would continue throughout her career and beyond. Major General Sullivan's intervention had been crucial, but it also highlighted the importance of senior leadership in creating an environment where all service members could succeed based on their abilities rather than stereotypes. The incident demonstrated that while prejudice still existed, the institutional military was committed to supporting those who proved themselves through performance. Colonel Harrison, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, was forced to reevaluate his own assumptions about female Marines. While he remained privately skeptical about some aspects of gender integration, he could no longer deny Sarah's competence or question her right to serve in combat roles. The confrontation at FOB Chapman became a defining moment not just for Sarah Martinez, but for the broader integration of women into combat positions. It demonstrated that while challenges remained, individual courage and institutional support could overcome prejudice and create opportunities for all service members to contribute their best efforts to the mission. Sarah's response to Master Sergeant O'Brien's challenge, "You're looking at her," became more than just a comeback. It became a declaration of equality, competence, and the unwavering belief that Americans who volunteer to serve their country deserve to be judged by their actions rather than their gender. The room that had gone silent in that moment had witnessed history being made. One conversation at a time, one confrontation at a time, and one courageous stand at a time. Sarah Martinez had not just defended herself, she had advanced the cause of equality for every woman who would follow in her footsteps, proving that with courage, competence, and conviction, any barrier could be overcome.